All right, well, today I wanted to talk about my time as a balding hat prisoner. There was a period of time where I didn't leave the house with that hat on. From the second I woke up to the time I went to sleep, I had either had a baseball cap or a fitted hat on. I would literally have the hat right next to my bed within arm's length. That's how bad it was at the time. It was a little bit easier to wear a hat back then as I was in college, and I could wear the hat to class. I had shaved my head completely after transferring to a new university, but after realizing how people reacted to me with a shaved head, I decided to grow the hair out and just wear a hat everywhere I went going forward. Wearing a hat when you're balding is kind of bittersweet in a lot of ways. So when you're wearing a hat, you automatically look younger as people can't see your shaved head or if you're balding. You notice that people treat you differently when you're wearing a hat as opposed to when I shaved my head, women never looked my way. And people in general just reacted to me differently when I was wearing a hat. However, I just hated wearing hats. I especially hated wearing them in the summertime. The hat just feels like it's a huge weight that's just sitting on your head, and you just start sweating. I also hated how the brim of the hat obstructed your view a lot when you looked up. It was like in one hand you look more like your age, but I absolutely hated wearing the hat as it was just like plain uncomfortable. And I just feel so much better when I don't have a hat glued to my head every single day, every second. When I wasn't around people, like when I was in my room, I would take off my hat, and just having the air hit my head felt amazing, honestly. I would even wear the hat if I would go out to eat or even at like holiday dinners. Like I remember the one year my grandmom telling me, "Take your hat off, you're inside." And then my aunt, who was hosting Thanksgiving dinner, was pretty cool. And she was like, "Oh, my mom, stop. He can wear it. It's not a big deal." Like, I didn't want to take off the hat anywhere and, like, showcase the balding rat's nest that I had at the time. I had a security job at the time where I would work at certain sites. And I always enjoyed sites where there was little foot traffic. So I worked Saturdays and Sundays. I would work a later shift and work from about 3 p.m. in the afternoon to 11 at night. And this site was at a company that was closed on the weekends. So it was literally just me, so I could walk around the building with my balding rat's nest and no one would see me. However, there were a few months where I worked at a site where there were like a ton of people working and they were all at different ages that I had to sign in and out of the building. And not having my hat with me just felt like terrible at the time because I wasn't able to hide my like massively receding hairline or my shaved head after I decided to just shave it off at the time. So I was in this like mental state of hating wearing a hat, but also hating not wearing a hat because my hair loss was like severely exposed. And looking back when I was this young, like one thing I do realize now is that people pay attention to you less than you think. Like you may think people are staring at the top of your head, or constantly looking at you. But to be honest, like most people are so consumed in what is going on in their own lives to notice. I mean, people do notice if you're balding, like if you're losing your hair, but people aren't thinking about that all the time. And while I was wearing the hat on campus, or if I was out somewhere on the weekends, I was always like super subconscious about my hat. I was like terrified of someone taking my hat off, or if I was in class, I would always, make sure the hat was like tied really closely to my head. I would always like adjust it and touch it in class, and just in the fear of it falling off. I would feel this way especially after I'd shaved my head once I got to like the Norwood 4 balding scale. And even if I had gone to the gym, like if I was doing like dumbbell chest press and I was like laying back on the bench, I was like so scared that my hat was going to fall off and it was just going to like expose my bald head. Even though I did shave my head for right before the semester, and I kind of walked around with a shaved head for a few months. Yeah, I just got super self-conscious about it. It was hard for me to admit at the time, but now I can look back and kind of admit that and realize exactly what had happened and why I was feeling that way. And I remember there was a girl that smiled at me a few months before I got my first hair transplant the following summer. I was still pretty heavy weight-wise, but I was starting to lose some of the weight. And I remember just thinking in my head that I wouldn't even say anything to her because the second she sees my balding head, she won't like me anyway. So I just didn't even try to pursue her. To be honest, like I didn't have many missed opportunities during those years back, as I was pretty overweight. And just looking back, I was always super paranoid as well back then. Like I was paranoid whenever I was wearing the hat. I was just so paranoid. It was like almost like worse than when I just shaved my head and walked around with it. I would be like so in my head that I thought people were looking at my hat all the time and like thinking that I was bald under there. Like it got to the point where I was like so paranoid that I just didn't want to do anything outside of going to class and like work. And even going to class and work like felt really like stressful at the time. And maybe I'd hang out with a good friend, but I was just constantly thinking about my hair and the fact that I was balding. Like literally almost every waking moment I was just fixated on. I was fixated on like losing my hair. And like I said, for a while I didn't leave my house without my hat. There was an incident after I shaved my head that really got me to be paranoid that I've mentioned in previous videos. I was at a buddy's place from a club that I had joined that was having a party at his place. And this was after I had shaved my head. Yeah, I had a positive mindset when I finally shaved my head after I was, had a massively receding hairline for a long time. I mean, for a couple of years. And I was in the bathroom while my buddy was talking to this girl outside of the bathroom. This girl wasn't in the club. And they had no idea that I was in the bathroom, as there were like a good amount of guests there, probably around 20 people at this party. The girl had asked, she's like, "Who's that old guy?" And my buddy John was like, "What are you talking about?" Like he just kind of played it off. Like I think he knew that she was talking about me, but he was just a cool guy and I guess didn't really want to get into it. And she was like, "The bald guy." And when I heard this, I was like looking in the mirror and I looked at like my fat, bald Mr. Clean self in the mirror. And like this really shook me to the core. And like at this party, like I was the only bald guy there. So I knew she was talking about me. It wasn't like, like especially in college, like you go to a party and you're bald, like you're probably the only bald guy. So it wasn't like, she was talking about someone else that was, out there. So this like really kind of hit me to the core. Like it really shook me pretty hard back then. So when I heard, it was tough. From that point on until I got my first hair transplant later that next year in the summer, like the hat was literally glued to my head. And then once I got my first hair transplant, I had to shave my head again, and I continued to be a hat prisoner for another few months. But once the new hair started to grow in, I ditched the hats completely. Like once the new hair grew in completely, the first hair transplant that I got, they really focused on like covering the receded hairline, because I was literally like a NORAD 4. They packed in 2,000 grafts into the receded hairline. They didn't get a lot of density in the first hair transplant, but it definitely made a massive difference. Like I went from like looking like I was 40 at like 23 to like looking like I was, in my, mid 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. So it was a massive, massive difference. And I almost rarely wear hats anymore just because it like reminds me of that period of time where like I really did feel like a hat prisoner. And being older now, I realize that no one was ever really looking at my hat. No one was wondering if I was bald or balding underneath the hat. Like if it helps any, like balding is brutal. Like I don't wish it on anyone, especially people that are in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, especially early 20s, or people in their late teens. I know some people go bald when they're 16, and that's got to be even more brutal. I just learned that some people do look down on you if you're young and you're balding, or you got a shaved head, but most people, they just don't think much of it, and they just continue on with their day. They're not fixated on you. They're not thinking about, is that guy wearing a hat? Is he bald? Is he covering up his balding? Like, that's honestly how I was thinking back then. Like, I was so, like, paranoid and, like, stressed out about it. I had so much anxiety that, like, I literally wore this hat everywhere I went. I guess a piece of advice I would say is, like, if you're feeling like a hat prisoner, I would examine your options and, figure out whether you want to go down the hair transplant route, you want to get on meds, whether you want to go the hair system route, or, if if you feel like you can, pull off the bald look better, shaving your head, and, maybe you have a, good bone structure. Maybe you're just comfortable. Maybe you can pull it off. Maybe you think you can pull it off and you're comfortable with it. But, when I was a hat prisoner, that was honestly, I feel like that was, I wouldn't say it's worse than being completely bald, but, for me, it was just, I wore this hat everywhere, and it just made me even more paranoid than when I shaved it and just kept it shaved for a couple months up until that incident. But, well, that's my take on being a hat prisoner. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. Feel free to comment down below your experience with balding, and feel free to subscribe. Until next time, take care.